Hello, fans of Sparta. Um, Today I'm going to estimate some numbers of Spartans who existed. The number of Spartiates, of course, the full citizens, the warrior class, the males who became citizen and finished the so-called agoge, the Spartan education, became full citizens, and how many of them were throughout the history of Sparta, and how many of them approximately, of course, died in the battle. So I'm more of a numbers guy. I like to kind of put things in numbers to get a proper perspective, and what gets measured gets managed. So we know that what we call the city of Sparta is 4, later 5 villages, 5 settlements that are kind of spread around on the west side of Eurotas River, and it's Pitane, Kinosura, Mezoa, Limnai, and Amiklai. So the population, so the family of Spartan families, Spartiate, the full citizen, and his wife, children, etc. So all of that people probably were 30 to 40,000 in these 5 settlements, not including other non-citizens, Mothaks, Periokoi, or household helots, etc. So we are talking just about the Spartans. When it comes to the number of Spartans, there's the number that gets thrown around, about 8 or 9,000 Spartans. One source is at one time, that's the highest number at one point of time, 8 or 9,000 Spartans they were, and at one point of time less than 1,000 Spartiates. The number of 9,000 comes from the one source that is mentioning how many of these kleros, these lands that were given to each Spartiate to maintain his status and his household, the piece of land worked by helots, it was like 9,000. And then there's like mention of this number of Spartan citizens, warriors, Spartiates, homoioi, that was like 8,000. What we know is also that if we were to believe Herodotus, 5,000 Spartans fighting at Platea, along with 5,000 of Periokoi, would be like the highest number of Spartans ever assembled in one single battle. There is there are numbers at the start of Messenian War that are mentioned. Not sure about the origins of that, but like each of the settlements, this obai, for settlements of Sparta would have to provide like 1,000 warriors, and along with some cavalry, it was estimated to be, before the Messenian War, of 4,500 people, 4,500 Spartiates, and then this number grew to just before the Persian wars to this about 8,000 Spartans. And then it diminished. I am skeptical about this number of 8 or 9,000 Spartan warriors. I assume it's also people who would retire after getting at the age of 60 and not really being included in the number of the active Spartan warriors. So if we are to believe the numbers of Herodotus at Plataea, 5,000 Spartans would also mean that there are at least 1,000 or 2,000 more Spartans protecting the city. Also, not only against the Helots, but against the Persian navy, sailing south and landing somewhere in Peloponnese. But any kind of estimation that would count the number of Spartans at any point of time over 10,000 is just based on what we know. What we know is it's unrealistic. Okay, so if we take like the conquering of Laconia and forming of the polis of Sparta, and having like more organized, more standing army, if you put that year when it begins, like 800 years before Christ, and then we extend to end of Sparta as a political subject, that was about 200 before Christ. We have like 600 years in between, which then if we divide that into the generations of people, so a generation in the context of Sparta would be, one generation would be roughly about 25 years, because it's like the Spartan women would have children after the age of 20, and the Spartans would marry late and like have less children as a consequence of that. So we can then put that one generation of Spartans would be around 25 years. So each century 4 generations are created, therefore it's roughly 25 generations of Spartans that we have. So before Sparta becoming a polis and a power, and then the demise of Sparta in 600 years is about 25 generations. Now from, like, let's say this 800 years before Christ up to 400 years before Christ, the end of the Peloponnesian War, we can roughly say maybe there's about 5,000 Spartans, active warriors, and then from this last 200 years before 400 to 200 before Christ, they are like really diminished from 2,000. Then in Corinthian War, less than 1,000. Then it was kind of reformed, but so it's this 8 generations would have maybe 20,000 warriors in the 20,000 Spartans existed in this last 200 years, and these 400 years before that, if you assume we have like 16 generations of around 5,000 Spartans. So at their peak there are maybe 8,000, 9,000, but before that then like maybe 4,000, 5,000, and then like kind of like diminishing. So it would, if you assume it's like 5,000, it's like about 80,000 Spartiates, active Spartiates, if we count them down each individually, from that period of 800 years before Christ to 400 years before Christ. And then we add about 20,000 in the last 200 years, we get roughly about 100,000 Spartiates that existed. So that's history of Sparta. All the famous Spartan warriors counted from 800 years before Christ to the end of Sparta was about 100,000 people. Okay. Next would be how many of them died in battle. How many of them died in battle? Now, according to the expert in ancient phalanx warfare, in ancient Greece, in these phalanx battles, usually the side who won, who broke their opponent's phalanx, would have fatalities about 5%. So if you had the phalanx that would number 1,000 people, then about 50 of them would die in the battle. And if you on the other side, the losing side, they were obviously not fit to task, so they would have more casualties, and their phalanx would break down, and they would be chased away and then killed, and like the wounded ones would be ran over and finished at whatever. But it would then account that the losing side would lose 15% of engaged soldiers. So that would mean like out of 1,150 would die. So it's like for every one on the winning side dying, there will be 3 more killed on the enemy side. Also, let's take into account that that fatalities, there would be lots of lightly wounded soldiers in that battles. A lot of them would have some kind of little cut, little stab, or whatever hit with the different projectiles, but the heavily wounded people would more likely to die than like in the modern times. Of course, it's like you are on some field, and after the battle, it's first aid. You don't call ambulance or helicopters or whatever. The doctors don't come there. Like the Spartans as well as others, but Spartans more had people to take care of their warriors, but to stop bleeding, give first aid and stuff. But it's like the ratio of those who died in the battle and heavily wounded was not so great. So it's if you get some heavily wounded, you are likely to die. So conquest of Laconia brought some casualties. Some Spartans died in these battles, and in that era there was also fighting with Argos. There was also fighting with Arcadians, and then there was Messenian War. The first Messenian War and then the second Messenian War, which it was such a prolonged time. It was a lot of skirmishes, ambushes. There were a few kind of bigger battles and sieges, but the Spartans must have suffered thousands of casualties in these two Messenian wars. And before that, they must have few thousand dead before that period. And then we have battles with Argos, battles with the Aegeans. So just before and these expeditions into Athens and so on. So we have already the number is climbing towards 10,000 dead, at least 5,000. Of course, I'm just like playing with numbers here. And then the Persian wars. Okay, we have firstly 300 that died at Thermopylae. Then we have 200 who died at Plataea. And then we have the Spartans also were present at the Salamis naval battle and this Mycala battle that was on land. And then further campaign with Pausanias, etc. We are now like approaching 1,000 Spartans dead in the war against Persians. And then we come to the Peloponnesian War, which is lots of kind of like this marching skirmishes and stuff, Athenian raids, on the Peloponnese, and the Spartans marching, like on a campaign, like this kind of asymmetric warfare. These two Peloponnesian wars, as I was taught in school, that it was the first and second Peloponnesian War. We have, I'm not counting the catastrophic, the earthquake. It's kind of downplayed, this 264 earthquake in Sparta, but I think like it was the turning point in history of Sparta that much weakened Sparta, and subsequent the rebellion of Helots, So of course all the rebellions with the Helots. I'm counting all the Spartans who died, squashing these rebellions of Helots, and as trying to get to the number of Spartans who died throughout the history of Sparta with the weapons in the hand as a Spartan, right? Of course, there's people who died in training. That like if you get into this survival in the mountains and Cryptea and these mock battles at the Platanistas island, and you had to survive this training school for the Spartans, but I'm not calculating these people. So there's a Peloponnesian War, and then after that we have now for sure it's like this from 800 years before Christ, 800 years before Christ, beginning of Sparta till end of the Peloponnesian War, around 400 BC, 403 BC. In these first 400 years, Spartans certainly lost about 10,000 warriors in all these wars, Helots rebellions, etc. it will be interesting now to calculate different enemies that Sparta had. Argos, the Messenians, the Arcadians, then the Persians, then against Athens and the allies in the Peloponnesian Wars, etc. Against Macedonians, against Romans weren't that much. Anyway, then we have the Corinthian War, and then we have the wars against this Macedonian hegemony, and then against this Achaean alliance, and then the Romans, etc. So this number is climbing up, but we have fewer numbers of Spartans in some of these very bloody battles, and we are coming to the number that I estimate is somewhere there between well over 10,000 dead Spartans, and I don't think that number climbs to 20,000. I think around 15,000, a little bit more, is the number of Spartans who died in battle, out of 100,000, and that's a quite big number, because of course some generations had less of these heavy wars and heavy fighting and stuff, and some suffered more, but 15% of all the Spartans died in battle, and of the kings of the Agiads and Europontidas, the two royal bloodlines, it's I have numbered 7 kings who died in the front line fighting, and like 4 or 5 of them who were like the suicide of Cleomenes the first and Cleomenes the third committed the suicide. There was Agis the third, I think, who tried to reform the Spartan society, and they hanged him. So it was pretty violent back then. Also, lots of violence in the other policies as well. But so it's I estimate very broadly estimate. Yeah, kind of playing with the numbers, but I would say it like, how many were Spartan warriors in these 600 years of Spartan history? About 100,000, maybe a little bit less, probably a little bit more, but this is the figures, around 100,000, and more than 10% of them, every 10th, died in battle. At least that's the minimum, and I would say like 15 to 20% of them died in the battle. 15% at least, I believe so. So that would be the Spartan numbers. Also, in the next video I have to find this my notes that I did. I have calculated the square kilometers of territory held by the Greek policies, all the Greek policies, over 1,200 of them that were, not just in mainland Greece but all over their territory and the number of citizens they have. So you get a figure about like when they held the most territory and the number of free citizens, which were normally like the male who would bear arms. So it's like estimated number of free citizens is proportional to the number of hoplites and of course other troops, because like early on it's like the real hoplites were more wealthy of the citizens and the other were like light troops. But anyway, like the number of warriors that the polis would gather and the territory they would control, because there was a fight for territory, of which is mostly mainland Greece. 85% is hills and mountains, so it's fertile, semi-fertile land, like 15% of that. And now it's hard to like estimate the fertile land, but just the territory that the polis would occupy and the military force that they had. It's roughly because I have the numbers of the biggest cities. There are some figures that are mentioned or estimated, like would be Athens, Argos, Syracuse, Corinth, etc., Sicyon, etc. So Sparta held, of course the military force would also be the Perioikoi, but the Perioikoi were subjects to rule of Spartans, but the Spartans ruled 10 times more territory than average polis, than your average polis. Like there's estimation for all these small polises, like their territory and the number of citizens, I'm going to show you in another video all the figures that I calculated this, but like Spartans controlled per square kilometer, they had a square kilometer of land, they had 10 times less warriors than other polis. So they held 10 times bigger territory in relation to the number of Spartans as other polis. And what I discussed is like, if the Spartans were like 8 to 9,000 at the highest number and the highest point of time when they had the most number of citizens, they held 8,500 square kilometers of territory. So that means for each square kilometer of territory they have one Spartan. And in the other policies they had around 10 free citizens. Out of most of them would be warriors, would be hoplites, engaging in different campaigns. So that's it's exceptional. It's really exceptional. 10 times larger territory than the number of them, and this territory is mostly enemy territory, because it's like 70% of all the population of the territory are the helots who just wait to rebel. And you assisted with the Perioikoi, who on occasion would also rebel, but mostly didn't. But they are not too keen, like to be bossed around by the Spartans, But what can they do? They were like spread all small communities against mighty Spartans. And later on, the Sparta maintained the same territory with far less numbers. At one point they had like 2,000 Spartans, and they have about the same territory. That would be like, for every Spartan, 4 square kilometers of terrain, 2 by 2 kilometers piece of territory for only one soldier. So that's fascinating. Anyway, this been half an hour of my take on the Spartan history. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.